So today we're going to talk about something pretty incredible. It's the story of how one of the most powerful empires in history, well, it systematically emptied the pockets of one of its richest colonies. It sounds like a dry accounting story, but believe me, it has massive consequences. We're talking about the drain of wealth. And really, it all boils down to this one central question, right? It's the big mystery at the heart of this whole thing. How did a region that was once one of the world's wealthiest end up so impoverished while under the rule of the world's richest empire? I mean, before colonial rule, India was a global economic powerhouse. By the time the British left, it was one of the poorest nations on Earth. So what on earth happened?
Well, this right here shows you the huge gap between the official story and, well, reality. The claim from Britain was always that they were bringing prosperity, development and modernization to India. But the actual numbers tell a completely different story. The reality, India's economy basically flatlined for almost 200 years. And you got to understand, this wasn't some unfortunate accident. It was a system.
So, to really wrap our heads around this system, we need to follow the trail of a kind of economic detective, the person who first put all the pieces of this puzzle together. And that brings us to the core idea of this entire explainer, the drain of wealth.
And here's our guy, Dadabhai Naoroji, often called the Grand Old Man of India. Now, he was this absolutely brilliant scholar and politician, and he was the first person to systematically prove how all this wealth was being moved from India over to Britain. He didn't just guess, he laid out the whole mechanism, piece by painful piece.
Okay, so here's the absolutely crucial thing to get. What Naoroji was talking about, this wasn't trade, not even close. In a fair trade, both sides get something valuable. The drain of wealth, it was a one-way street. We're talking about India's entire national surplus, all the profits, the savings, the money that should have been reinvested back into the country, just being systematically siphoned off to Britain with nothing of real economic value coming back in return. It was pure extraction.
And listen, Naoroji did not pull any punches when he talked about this. This quote from his famous book says it all. India was bleeding at every pore. He saw it exactly for what it was, not just some numbers on a ledger, but a constant, devastating hemorrhage of the country's economic lifeblood.
All right, so the big question is, how did this actually work? How is this massive amount of money moved? It wasn't like one single bank transfer. Oh no, it was a whole complex web of financial channels, all designed to do one thing: move money from Indian taxpayers into the British treasury and into British pockets. So let's follow the money.
Naoroji broke it down into a few main channels. You've got these things called home charges. We'll get to those. Then there were the salaries and pensions for every single British official working there. There was also this really cleverly designed trade system, an unrequited export drain. On top of that, you had profits from British companies, and get this, India was even forced to pay for Britain's military campaigns in other parts of the world.
Okay, let's just zoom in on one of those, the home charges, to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about. By the late 19th century, this amounted to around 40 million pounds every single year. I mean, in today's money, that's billions and billions being extracted year after year.
So what were these home charges actually for? Where was all that money going? Well, Indian tax money paid the salaries and pensions for British officials, not just in India, but back in London too. It paid the interest on debts that Britain raised for its own projects. It even paid for the entire India office building and staff in London. Basically, India was being forced to pay for the privilege of being colonized.
Then there was the trade drain, which was another, honestly, pretty ingenious mechanism. See, India was exporting way more than it was importing, selling all these valuable raw materials like cotton, tea, you name it. But that huge profit, that surplus, it didn't benefit India. Instead, Britain basically used it as its own personal slush fund to pay off its own debts with other countries like the US or China. So India's earnings were just rerouted straight to London to fix Britain's balance sheet.
Now, all of this systematic drain, this wasn't just some abstract economic problem. This wasn't just numbers on a page. It had devastating, real-world consequences for millions and millions of people. This is where we see the real human cost of colonial rule.
I mean, the difference is just staggering when you look at it. During this exact same period, Britain's economy absolutely exploded. Its income shot through the roof, fueling the Industrial Revolution. And what happened in India? Its per capita income pretty much flatlined for 200 years. All the capital that should have been building India's future was instead being used to build Britain's. And the human cost? It was catastrophic. When you pull all the surplus capital out of a country, there's nothing left to invest in things like, say, agriculture or irrigation. The entire country became incredibly vulnerable. And you can see the result right here. Just look at how frequently major famines hit in the late 19th century. We're talking tens of millions of people dead. And the most heartbreaking part? All while this was happening, India was still being forced to export food to help pay for the drain.
So the long-term consequences were just profound. It led to widespread deep-rooted poverty. It completely deindustrialized the country, collapsing its famous textile and handicraft industries. It basically reduced India to being just a supplier of raw materials for British factories. And with all the money gone, what was left for the essentials? For things like health, for education? Nothing.
But Naoroji's theory did so much more than just diagnose the problem. It became a spark, an idea that lit a fire. This economic argument became the intellectual ammunition for India's growing independence movement.
You see, this economic argument became a powerful political weapon. First, it gave the nationalists a clear, data-driven case against colonialism. It wasn't just about feelings anymore. It was about hard numbers. Second, this one powerful idea managed to unite all the different groups of Indian nationalists, from the moderates to the extremists, around a single powerful cause. And finally, it gave them a concrete demand. Stop the drain. Give us back control of our own economy.
Now, of course, there was a debate. The British had their counter-argument. They'd say, hey, these payments are legitimate. They're for all the good things we brought you, like railways, administration, law, and order. But the nationalist rebuttal was pretty sharp. They'd point out that those railways weren't built for Indians. They were built to get raw materials out of the country faster and to move troops in more easily. They were tools of extraction, not development.
I think the historian Bipin Chandra really put it best. He said that the drain converted India from a country of surplus to one of chronic scarcity. And that just sums it up perfectly. It took an economy that produced more than it needed and turned it into one that was constantly struggling with not having enough.
And all of this leaves us with one final, really important question to think about. How does this history of economic extraction still shape the world we live in today? You know, the relationship between former colonies and global powers? It's not just ancient history. It brings up huge questions about global debt, about trade deals, and about the economic imbalances that still exist. So understanding the drain of wealth isn't just about the past. It's a lens that helps us make sense of the world right now.